Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the person who runs Iron Circus Comics, as well as one of the people behind the currently being Kickstarted multimedia project, Lackadaisy, the animated short film. It's C. Spike Trotman. Thanks for coming on, Spike.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the most basic question I can ask, but I feel like it's kind of something you have to ask at this point, given where we're at. How are you doing?
Honestly, I try not to talk too much about how I'm doing right now because I'm doing pretty good. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, I'm extremely fortunate. My husband has a day job, and his day job told him just so everybody knows, I'm in Illinois, and Illinois is currently under a shelter at home order from the governor. But my husband's job has told him to start working from home a good week before that order was in place. So he's here every day working at the kitchen table, and it's nice to have him around. And the kind of work he's doing isn't the kind of work that's particularly affected in a negative way by what's currently going on. If anything, they would arguably have more need for him.
Right.
So we're not particularly anxious about his job going anywhere. And obviously I run Iron Circus, so my job isn't going anywhere. And while things have been, I think I felt the brunt of COVID before a lot of people did, because a lot, if not most, I'd say like 80% of Iron Circus's books are printed in China. And of course, COVID was in China, coronavirus was in China before it got on a plane and hit the US and Europe and everywhere else. And so I was feeling the brunt of that before everyone else, because the plants that were printing my books were shutting down. And my print tech was basically telling me the situation, like updating me daily on the situation. And it got to the point where the people who worked in the plants couldn't come to work every single day unless they had a note from their doctor. So imagine if every single employee of a plant needs to present a doctor's note saying this person is not sick before they would be allowed to come to work. I mean, most of them just didn't bother. So the plants were really quiet for weeks. And this is when I had a book that was doing incredibly well in the pre-order phase. And so I was over here just like yanking my hair out publicly because I had this really high demand book, and I kept having to push back the street date over and over and over. And every time you do that in publishing, you're terrified. It's like, it's not uncommon for people to have to do that,
right?
Especially small publishers. But every time you do that, you're sort of filled with this terror that, you know, a couple of people are just going to go, you know what, never mind, screw this, I don't want it this bad, and cancel their pre-order because they thought they were going to get it in March, but now they're not going to get it till May, you know. Fortunately, that didn't happen. So we've got the book that is currently on the boat. It's on a freighter somewhere in the Pacific. It'll hit Long Beach in the coming weeks. It's coming. It's kind of, since Wuhan and China are kind of over the hump coronavirus wise, it got loaded and it's been put on the freighter and it's on its way. So that's actually kind of a sigh of relief for me. So, you know, that the hard part there is over for me. And plus I have a Kickstarter running right now that you mentioned, and it's doing really well. And we have implemented measures to make up for money that Iron Circus would have otherwise made, especially at two of the bigger cons of the year, which are Emerald City Comic Con, ECCC, and Toronto Comic Arts Festival, which is TCAF. Those are two really, really good cons for Iron Circus. And obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably know that they were both canceled by organizers out of concerns for the health and safety of attendees and people who would have tables. And you know, not having that money kind of sucks. So we've implemented some measures like putting all of our 2020 books up for pre-order on the Iron Circus website and doing a few sales. And actually one of the more innovative and creative people who are affiliated with Iron Circus, Amanda Lafreniere, has basically turned her own Twitch channel over to something called PajamaCon, which is an online-only Comic-Con where we organize panels and live streams, and people can kind of promote their work, promote their Etsy or their Shopify or whatever they might have, their commission list. Because everyone knows right now, a lot of creatives, especially independent creatives, have it kind of rough.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of people are maybe ordering commissions of their D&D characters that they might not have otherwise done, or pre-ordering books that they told themselves a few months ago, oh, I'll just get it at the next con, because who knows if the next con's even going to happen.
Yeah.
So it's demanding a lot of thinking on your feet right now, but I would hazard that taking all of the small and mid press into consideration when it comes to comics, Iron Circus is on the lucky side of the fence.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's two things that help a lot. One, I feel like you have a very flexible business structure, like the way you approach things. It seems like that if you want to change something, if you know you need to change something because of like a societal change, you can. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is, you mentioned how like the fear of people dropping off on pre-orders and stuff like that because of delays. But one thing I've always been really impressed by your fans and the people who support Iron Circus is that you have people who don't just, it's like, if you like Marvel and DC, you like the characters, but people who like Iron Circus believe in you, and people who like Iron Circus believe in Iron Circus. And it's like, if you liked Smut Peddler, you might probably just buy the Chancellor and the Citadel because you believe in your curatorial voice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally get that. I have had people tell me at cons and on Twitter and on live streams and stuff, they're like, oh, I wouldn't have considered buying this book, but you published it, so I'll give it a chance. And it's like, oh, wow, that's quite a compliment. And I don't know if you know that or not. But yeah, I think Iron Circus kind of has a philosophy to it. A lot of people want to support, and I think that's got me a really long way. And I think that's part of why so many people are so excited about our shift into, oh God, I always feel like such a jackass saying this, but it's so true. It's like our shift into becoming a multimedia company. It's like, cause no, oh my God, every little jagoff at the like comic convention and artist alley refers to their like company that steals Xeroxes from dad's work as a multimedia company. It's like, no, you're really not though. These are mini comics. So, but it's what we're, oh God, I hate this word too.
It's fair. It's
pivoting
fair.
We're pivoting to multimedia. And, I love comics, but I also love cartoons. And one of the things that I have mentioned a couple of times before, like on Twitter and on panels and in interviews, is when I was a lot younger, I flirted with the idea of entering animation, and I was essentially talked out of it by one of those talks that animators give that was streaming online. And he was like, here's the deal. If you think you can be happy doing literally anything else, you should do that, because animation is really tough. It's really competitive. It's not going to be like a salary position. These are all contract gigs unless you're very, very lucky and you're among the very few. And of course, this was decades before all the cool stuff that's happening now. There was no Steven Universe or Big Mouth or B-Stars or any of that stuff. This was way, way, way back when pretty much it was The Simpsons and maybe a couple Simpsons and South Park. Like that. Right. That's how back in the day this was. And like the person being interviewed was just like, if you can do anything else and be happy, you should do that. And you should also keep in mind the chances that the ideas on the screen will be yours is infinitesimally small. It's microscopic. That's like maybe 2 or 3 people out of a several hundred person team. And it's something you have to work your way up to. And the vast majority of people in animation never work their way up. So you need to go in understanding that. You might spend your entire career as a cog working on someone else's ideas, and you need to be okay with that.
Yeah.
And I listened to that and was like, I'm not okay with that. So I just turned around, I was like, well, in comics, I'll just do comics then. Because honestly, there was maybe a couple of months where it could have gone either way, where I was like submitting applications to CalArts and stuff. Like I was kind of serious about it, and I decided against it. But I've always liked cartoons. I've always liked adult cartoons. And I kind of am in awe these days about what cartoons have become, as opposed to when I was in middle school, high school, and like 90% of the stuff I was watching was like my best friend's parents had a laser disc, had a laser disc machine, and we would watch like Ranma 1/2 laser discs, and we would get tapes from American soldiers who were stationed in Japan. And what they would do is they would just record stuff off the TV. And quite frankly, we didn't care what it was. Like, to this day, I couldn't tell you what I was watching. What it mattered is it was a cartoon. It was from Japan. It was totally unlike anything on American television. And we would just sit there and be like, God, I wish this country was like at least a little tiny bit into cartoons in a way that wasn't like little kid stuff. Like, can you imagine a world where there would be cartoons made for adults and they'd look like Akira? Can you imagine that in America? No way. Oh my God, we'll never be this cool. And, you know, fast forward 20-ish years, 25-ish years. And, I'm really astonished by how far American animation has come, where, you know, BoJack Horseman is one of the best things on Netflix, end of. And that's amazing to me. I'm so pleased.
Yeah, no, it is really awesome. I will say, like, my wife had a very similar experience, because my wife, she was, her dad was in the Air Force, and so they moved a lot, and she lived in Japan for 3 years. And I remember her, like, telling me about it. She was like, yeah, we were watching, like, Lupin the Third and wondering, like, why don't we have this? Like, here. And it's just like, I don't know. It is funny how you have that different perspective. But one other thing I think is really funny is, so you talked about that animation talk and about how they're like basically do something else. And I think it's really funny, not in like it's a funny, quirky sort of thing that is the same type of conversation or talk that I feel like a comic creator could have. And you somehow jumped into both of those mediums like all in. You're like, yes, let's do this. But, you know, before we get into Lackadaisy, I do want to actually talk about that, because the thing that I really love about Iron Circus is, you know, you looked at comics and you said, like, I want to make comics the way I want to make comics. And so you went a different game. You went very heavy on the Kickstarter. Since then, you know, you're working with Consortium for book dealings and everything like that. But you're doing your own thing. Why when you were looking to start up Iron Circus, why was, you know, I you know, not to overstate it, actually, I don't even think it's overstating. You like reinvented the game and created your own thing. Why was that something you wanted to do?
I have a very strong sense of, God, move, I'll do it. Like, that's kind of just been my whole philosophy, where it's like, there were kind of comics I wanted to read. There were the kind of cartoons, again, just sort of bringing it back, that I would love to watch. And I know that there is more talent out there and there are more stories out there that I think would go over big if they just had a bigger platform, a bigger stage, I guess. It's just that they're not being afforded opportunities. And I would think to myself back in the day, like when I was in my early 20s and trying to figure out how to make all this stuff work, one of the things that I kind of took to heart was just, nobody's going to help me. I have to figure it out for myself.
Right.
And that's why I think I'm such a good fit for Kickstarter. I think there is not a lot of people, maybe, this isn't something you can really go out and do a head count on, I suppose. But I think there are people who kind of approach life with, I'm just going to sit here and be good and someone will have to have noticed me eventually. And no one has to notice you eventually. You can spend your entire life being incredible and literally get nowhere because no one noticed. And it's not a value judgment on you at all. It's just a matter of, you know, who made the most noise. And I like kind of think of it in terms too about the artists that we talk about, the artists we think of, and I'm talking sort of like fine artists. They have a lot of lore that goes along with them. So you're kind of almost selling the person just as much as you're selling their work. Like, people talk about Frida Kahlo and her work, but they're just as quick to mention, oh, and she was married to this guy who cheated on her, and they loved each other very much, but they couldn't stop, you know, doing other people. And did you know she did Leon Trotsky too? Oh my God. And also, you know, she was hit by a street trolley. She was a terrible trolley. Oh, and look at how she dressed. Isn't this wild? And whoa, unibrow, whoa. You know, it's like, okay, cool. Let's talk about her paintings. And the same deals with Picasso. It's like, oh, it was terrible to his lovers. And oh, also this and also that. And did you see this outrageous thing he did and this outrageous thing he said? And oh, he stayed in France during the Nazi occupation. And oh, like this is how he contended with that. Like, okay, cool. And Salvador Dali, who is probably the king of these people, arguably. I suppose you could also say that Andy Warhol kind of had this on lock. But these people kind of built these structures almost about themselves and made themselves as much an element of their work as the work themselves, because their work was worthy, but they also put themselves out there. They also sort of presented themselves not so much as an aspect of their work, but like in partnership with what they were doing. And so I kind of slowly, kind of osmotically absorbed, like, okay, so you need to sell yourself, for lack of a better term. You need to be part of the package. And that helps a lot if you are planning on going it alone. And I understood the kind of comics I was interested in at the time. Again, we need to think in terms of like 20 years ago. I kind of understood the kind of stuff I was interested in, and I wanted to read, and I wanted to publish, and I wanted to see in the world. There weren't any publishers around that I could submit to. Like, there was no Random House, there was no Harper Alley when I was 20. God, I'm so envious of these kids these days. But like, there was none of that, where now a lot of kids kind of have a game plan when they're coming out of, let's just pretend they come out of SCAD. And they're all like, okay, so what am I going to do now? Well, obviously, I'm going to get a Patreon. And obviously, I'm going to do my webcomic for a year. And then obviously, I'm going to run a Kickstarter. Then maybe I'll get into storyboarding. And it'd be cool if I could storyboard for Cartoon Network. But if that doesn't work out, I will submit a few pitches to Harper Alley and Random House, and we'll see what happens. And it's like, none of that was there when I was 20. There was nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. So a lot of people my age who were in comics then, who weren't in what were referred to then as mainstream comics, they kind of needed to figure it out on their own. And I was just part of that group that figured it out on my own. And we all kind of went our own separate ways kind of doing that. And that's honestly carried through to modern day, where, I mean, for a while now, I've been sort of like, I like cartoons. How can I get in on that? Because I don't know how. Because the one sort of flaw in being, I'm not a huge fan of this term, but like, bear with me here. Like, being kind of this self-made thing,
sure,
this business, is that I didn't go through the ranks in an orderly fashion. So I don't perhaps have the contacts that other people might have. Like a person who would move to California and then get started in storyboarding, and then maybe move up to the writer's room because they met this guy and this girl and this guy and this girl. And, everybody came together, and they kind of, as a group, like people who were all roommates in college on the same pod, just moved upwards together. I didn't have that. I'm still very much, in a lot of ways, an outsider to a lot of things. And people are aware of me, but I'm not part of any structure. I built my own structure. And so at some point I was just like, I'd like to get an animation, but it's clearly something I'd have to do on my own too. And like, maybe when people who are already in animation have a point of interface with me that is already sort of an animation thing, like they don't have to, figure out where to plug me in to the, the animation strata or whatever. Maybe that'll make things a little easier. And that, it's so weird. It's like the Lackadaisy thing came along at the exact right time. And I'll admit, like, here's a little special note for a lot of people who are listening to this podcast. I'm not gonna say this publicly anywhere but here, but I'm kind of running this same game on video games right now.
Ooh.
But yeah, but like with the animation thing, I was kind of sitting there and just sort of floating along, looking around, trying to say, how would this work? What would be good for this? What's a thing that I could sort of bring this puzzle piece marked animation and this puzzle piece marked first animation project, and I could put them together in such a way that I'm sure it would work, and I'm sure it would fit, and I'm sure people would notice, and I'm sure it would actually lead to something. And when I was in California for a very, very small show called California.
Yeah. Jen Wings, right?
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's adorable. I was doing Kala, and honestly, I was just doing it as an excuse to go to California and go look at graveyards, because in case you folks didn't know, there's some real good graveyards in California. And I'm gross, and I like graveyards. And I ended up not going to any because of, oh wow. But yeah, while I was at Kala, I was sitting behind my table, and an animator came up to me, and their name is Fable Siegel, and Fable's, hey, wow, I'm so glad you're here. I'd like to talk to you because I'm working with Tracy Butler on Lackadaisy Cats, and we're sitting here going, we want to make an animated short, and if it ends up being just for the fans, that's cool. But if it ends up leading to bigger and better things, that'd be cool too. And we were wondering, like, we want to like do a Kickstarter for it and stuff, but we wouldn't know where to start. And I just like, if you've ever seen just like a leopard just leap from the tall grass and just latch onto a totally, a gazelle that had no idea it was there. That was kind of me. I was like, oh, yes. Oh, we could do this. Oh, we could fucking do this. Oh, we could do this. It's immediately started just talking directly over Fable. Just like, oh, I'm sure it was giving off big, weird energy because this is like kind of the thing I was waiting for, where it's like, oh, I'll tell you exactly how we'll do it too. We'll do it this way. We'll do it this way. I know a guy. I know when we'll launch it. I'll do this. And Fable's like, okay, all right. Well, I have to get back to Tracy and ask what she thinks, but okay, this sounds good. And I'm like, yes, we're doing it. And like, Fable was maybe 20 feet from my table, and I texted my husband. I was like, okay, you need to go online, and you need to get this image and that image. You need to put them together. You need to start planning a video because we're doing a Lackadaisy Cats Kickstarter for animation. And he's like, baby, are you okay? I'm like, yes, no, this is working. This is it. This thing I was waiting for. The planets have aligned. It's happening. So that's kind of how that happened. It was just an absolute random dumb luck thing at a Comic-Con. And this kind of circles back to what we were talking about, I think, a little bit before the show started, like the cons that are getting canceled. More happens there than just selling books. And
yeah.
The Lackadaisy Kickstarter is a great example of exactly that.
I love that the origins of Lackadaisy and your role in it was basically, I mean, maybe this is me presupposing what Fable and Tracy were thinking of, but it's just like, who's the best there is at Kickstarters?
Oh, that's so flattering. I haven't worked out. I think a lot of that, though, is there's power in being first. There's power in being an early adopter, which is why I'm to a practical level. Like, I still don't have any of like the Amazon Echo stuff or Alexa in my house because don't like those. But I'm an early adopter for things I'm fascinated by and I can see the potential of. And
sure,
one of the things I talk about a lot is Kickstarter launched in 2009, and that was the year I ran my first Kickstarter in 2009. And it was, when I first saw it, I was just like, of course this is going to work. Of course it is. Like, this is so, I can't believe there's anyone out there who thinks this won't work. This is so obvious to me. And that's the beauty of it, how obvious and clear it is. And all it does is take what so many web cartoonists were already doing and make it transparent and automated. That's all it does.
Well, and the thing I think that is, I've backed a lot of Kickstarters, and one of the secret sauce things is like you start, like you look at your record, and near as I can tell, you have had 24 Kickstarters and you've hit on all of them.
Yep. Haven't had a fail. I mean, failure is always a possibility.
Right.
But yeah. I have never had a failure, no.
Exactly. And so I think to a certain degree, there's two things. One, it's like you develop the reputation of somebody who is known for Kickstarter, but also like not only do you succeed at it, but you actually you deliver. And that is one of the huge things with crowdfunding is like I've backed a number of Kickstarters that, fund but do not deliver, or maybe deliver way down the line and everything like that. And so if you develop the reputation as somebody who crowdfunds successfully but also delivers, that's the essential combination that you need to be successful, not just once, not just twice, but 24 times and counting, I guess.
Yeah, honestly, it's the thing that always amazes me are the people who, like, they have one Kickstarter and it funds for like $20,000 and then they're like, yeah, and like they run off with the $20,000 and it's like, okay, but like that's
now the work begins.
Yeah, it's like, okay, like this is the beginning though. Like the Kickstarter is honestly the easiest part of any project, and it's the hard work starts after you've been funded and now you owe people something. And one of the most rewarding things about Kickstarter is if you say to someone, I promise I will give you a yellow duck tomorrow, and tomorrow you give them a yellow duck. They understand next week if you come up and you go, if you give me $10, I'll give you a brown cow tomorrow. They will give you the $10.
Right.
And you will give them a brown cow. And it's like, when it's understood, you are going to come through.
Yes.
You can sort of air quotes get away with a lot more, which is part of why I think the Lackadaisy thing has worked so well, because no, I've never done animation before, but at this point, like, I have 22,000 people who have backed a Kickstarter for me at some point. And they look and they go, I believe she can do it. Let's do it. I believe, like, they haven't personally vetted Fable. They haven't personally vetted Tracy. They haven't gone through the list of people on the animation team and gone, but can this person deliver? There is a sort of assumed competence because, well, Spike wouldn't be doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that is... I have to say really quick, this is just an observation. I've talked to a lot of people during Kickstarters in the process of it, and normally that window is like harrowing for people. And you are by far the most enthusiastic person I've ever heard while this is going on, because it's like normally it's a pretty stressful period. Is it a stressful period for you, or now that you're so deep into it, you're kind of like you've done it so many times, you kind of have it scienced out?
Yeah, this is kind of the thing. Every once in a while, I'll have a faint worry about a Kickstarter, but they have never stressed me out because when I started doing them, they were this weird thing that didn't mean much and weren't really significant. And they didn't have their roots in the comic ecosystem like they do now. They were just this weird thing off in the corner. And when I launched my first Kickstarter, I was totally ready for it to fail. I didn't care. And if it had failed, it wouldn't have been a big deal. It would have just been one of many things I'd tried that hadn't worked. And I would go and look for something else. So there was no high stakes attached to it.
Yeah.
And so now that Kickstarter is like, I don't even know, like almost 11 years old or something. And it's become an institution. It's become a rite of passage. It's a milestone in a lot of cartoonists' lives, like my first Kickstarter. And as a result, there's a lot of anxiety attached to it and a lot of worry, especially if they've never run a Kickstarter before, they've never sold anything to anyone before. Maybe they're worried that it won't fund. And if it doesn't fund, oh God, I'll have a failed Kickstarter. Oh my God, I'll cry myself to sleep for a week. I never had that period because I was just like, okay, let's try it.
Yeah.
And when it worked, I was like, cool. And then it just kept working and working and working. And yeah, I've never had a lot of anxiety attached to a Kickstarter. I've had, fingers crossed, let's hope this works when it comes to Kickstarter, especially like I had the Complete Girls with Slingshots project. And that, until the Lackadaisy one, was the most expensive one I ever launched. And that was a $50,000 goal. And I remember I launched that sitting in Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C., because I was getting on a flight to England. And I just launched it from my phone and then went to sleep on the plane. And when I woke up in the UK, it was already at $100,000. And I was like, oh, I probably should have been promoting it during while I was on that was the one time I could have justified buying Wi-Fi for my phone so I could tweet about it. But no, I was just tired. So
Understandably.
Yeah, it's like even that project didn't fill me with a ton of anxiety. The Lackadaisy one, its goal is 85,000, and that is the highest now to date that I've ever done. And even sitting here, like kind of in the stark light of day, like in the week before we launched the Kickstarter, when I had my publicist going like, we can't bring that down lower. We can't put this Kickstarter off because of the disaster that's going on outside. You're determined to do this. Okay, we'll make it work. Like I had that, and then 85K. That's a lot. That's a lot to ask. And that if anything would have merited anxiety, it would have been that situation. But my attitude was just like, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So I have to know if this would have worked.
And now, a quick word from our sponsor. I want to take a quick second to give a shout out to my friends at TKO Studios. TKO is a new comics publisher doing things a little differently, with each of their titles being binge released in trade paperback and 6-issue collector's box sets at the same time. Their second wave of comics dropped recently, including one of my comics of the year in Jeff Lemire and Gabriel Hernandez Walt's Sentient, Roxanne Gay and Ming Doyle's The Banks, and more, as well as gems from their first wave, like Garth Ennis and Steve Epting's remarkable war story, Sarah. Each is available now at tkopresents.com in trade, single-issue box sets, and digital release. Want to check these comics out before you order? Well, I have great news for you. If you visit tkopresents.com, you can read the first issues of each title for free right now. If you like what you read and you're a retailer, reach out directly to them at sales@tkopresents.com or go to tkopresents.com/vendors to order. TKO offers a 50% order discount as well as free shipping in the United States, a deal that's pretty hard to beat. Just a reader? That's cool too. You can order whichever comics you like directly off their site as well. Visit tkopresents.com to learn more today. And now, back to the show. So, really quick for listeners that don't know, Spike's currently being kickstarted multimedia project is Lackadaisy, the animated short film. It's an animated short film based on Tracy J. Butler's webcomic Lackadaisy that's about a Prohibition-era speakeasy called Lackadaisy starring anthropomorphic cats, which is maybe the best sentence I've ever said in my entire life. I mean, I have 2 cats, and like I've always been like, man, what would it be like if I could have conversations with them? It'd probably be horrible, to be honest. But so you're doing it with Butler and director Fable Siegel involved, as I said. It's already around 240% raised, and you just killed it on the first day. So we've already talked about the origins of it, but I did want to ask, like, when we're talking about the success of Kickstarters and we're talking about how to make a project like this work, I think one of the things that people really struggle with is, you know, did I make the right decision on rewards? Did I make the right decisions on goals? Did I make the right decisions on the things that are meant to be the carrot to draw people to this? Yeah. And I think one of the fascinating things about this is it is designed to fund an animated short, but what you're actually using to draw people in a lot of ways, you know, the fundamental thing that you're really using on the Kickstarter is the Lackadaisy Essentials. It's 100 or so page hardcover collecting, never before published mini comics, one-off sketches, and other creative work by Tracy delving into the world and details of the Lackadaisy webcomic, as it says on Kickstarter. So when you all were developing this and you were trying to kind of sprinkle your Spike magic on this thing, how did you decide the right way to approach this? Because I imagine a lot of people would have looked at a animated film and mostly looked at the animation side. Why was this the right answer?
A lot of people who back Kickstarters, they want something tangible for their trouble. They want some sort of memento of, I back this Kickstarter. That's really easy when you're a publisher and what you make is books, because your Kickstarter backer rewards are books. And while venturing into animation was new for Iron Circus, publishing was old hat for us. We have a system. We have, you know, a flow chart. Everything gets done according to a spreadsheet. We know what we're doing when it comes to publishing. So we kind of wanted to team the thing we knew how to do with the thing that was kind of new territory for us. And also we wanted to entice people to back with something that will actually show up in the mail and be able to sit on their bookshelf. A lot of film and animation Kickstarters, I find, like, don't get me wrong, a lot offer things like commissions and so forth. But I think they tend to fall down a little bit when it comes to tangible rewards. Some do things like, oh, you can come to a venue and you can see the debut of the film. And like, that's good too. But what if I don't live in Calabasas or wherever you're from? You know, then I can't come to your venue and watch the show. I would rather have something tangible. And when they do have tangible things, it's usually very, not trying to be judgy, like kind of flimsy things, like postcards that say thank you. Whereas a book is something that's hardy. It's going to last for years. And it's going to be full of things where if you care about Lackadaisy, you're going to care about this. And it's going to be something that you can look at and, you know, take down from the shelf and put back. And 10 years from now, it'll still be there. And I find those are the backer rewards that tend to go over best. Yeah. So when I talked to Tracy about this, I basically said, you know, we need to have some kind of book attached to this. And I think people would really go for it. And she absolutely agreed. She was just like, yeah, we should have some sort of book that people can take home with them. And that's been great because, you know, that's been what the vast majority of backers have gone for, a book. And it works. It works. You know, you don't mess with what works.
Yeah. I mean, I have to admit, I am one of those people who, when I watch a movie, I love watching special features. I love reading IMDb trivia pages and just like reading the depths of how these productions came into place. And so something like this, especially, I mean, Lackadaisy first started in, I think, was it 2006?
Yeah, it's a pretty old comic.
Yeah, so Tracy has, I'm sure, a lot to work with, and giving that existing readership something that they can really, you know, dive into and like see how this thing that they really enjoy kind of, you know, like the roots of it and like the foundational creative element to it. That seems to be like an ideal type thing to draw those people into this kind of project.
Yeah, I think Lackadaisy had a huge advantage over a lot of other animated projects too, because it has an existing fan base, a very large existing fan base, and it has so much content that's already existent too. Whereas a lot of stuff you see in the animation category is one-offs that people are attempting to do. There are obvious outliers on that, people who aren't one-offs, people who are trying to do more, but a lot of it is just sort of maybe a student animation or a hobby animation that someone's trying to get together, and they may not have, a cabinet with 50 pages of sketches and enough content for a book to give people, or they may not have, 5,000 people who read their comic every day and would love to see it animated. So it had a huge advantage. And if there's anything I like, honestly, it's a sure thing. And if I can be frank, Lackadaisy felt like a sure thing when people brought it to me. And it's like, obviously, these people are super dedicated to this decade plus old comic that has tons and tons of backstory and lore and readership. And it's the exact sort of thing that people would look at it and they would admit it is unusually beautiful. They would admit that it's really fun. It's like a really good read. It's really aesthetically pleasing. But at the same time, everyone would be like, yeah, but I could never see any animation studio picking this up. So it was kind of like this perfect fit for Iron Circus.
So a few questions in relation to that. I was curious. So Fable comes to you and you're at the table.
Yes.
And
yes.
you jump at her to attack her to say, I'm doing this. Now, there's two things that seem like obvious draws. There's Lackadaisy as a webcomic and like working on that as the project. And then there's also you wanted to work in animation to begin with. Was it a blend of both of those things that made that such a I'm going to attack Fable type move for you?
I'm going to attack Fable. No, honestly, this is one of my favorite things about this story. When I was doing Kala, I basically, and before I mess up, let me go ahead and make sure. I'm going to go and see what Kala stands for. Comic Arts LA. Okay, cool. But when I did Comic Arts LA, when I got on that plane, I was in the worst mood you could possibly imagine. I had my absolute bitch face on. It was terrible because there had been so much drama involved in getting my boxes shipped to Kala. Like, I don't know what was up with UPS. They just decided to not do their job for like a week straight. And so, like many cons, Comic Arts LA had very specific rules about this is when your boxes can show up. And we shipped everything in accordance with those rules. But then UPS decided to let them sit in the warehouse for multiple days and then just send them back to us. And then we panicked and overnighted a bunch of stuff. But then UPS, instead of, the boxes that they sent back, they only sent back half and then they sent the other forward. So I was going to end up with like something like 3 times as many books as I intended to go there with, because it was like a little tiny con. I didn't expect to sell much. Mm-hmm. So we now had like this massive charge for rush shipping a bunch of books there. And half the books that we'd originally shipped within the window were returned, and then half were already on their way to California. And I was just like, this is horrible. This is an omen. This is going to be the worst con ever. I can just feel it in my bones. This is going to suck so bad. I'm going to have to figure out how to pack all these books back because it's so small. It's literally taking place in a gymnasium, and it's just like on a basketball court. That's how small it is. And it's just like, I'm not going to sell all these. This is going to suck. I don't even want to do it. But the thing is, you don't bitch out of your obligations. Pardon my French. So it's like, whatever. I got on the plane, got into my hotel. It's like, whatever, the whole time. It's like, I'll just do this con. And then I did it, and it set the tone for pretty much the rest of Iron Circus's existence. And it just kind of goes to show that, like, you can never tell. Like I did not go there planning to meet Fable. That is the very first time I saw them in my entire life.
Wow. But did you have roots with Lackadaisy? Was that something you were familiar with?
I was aware it existed, but I honestly thought Lackadaisy was spoken for.
Sure.
On pretty much every level, because it's not considered good form to approach someone who already has a publisher with any kind of sort of proposition of any sort.
Yeah.
So I figured if this was something Tracy had wanted, she would go to her publisher with it.
Right.
So it's just like, okay, whatever.
And little did you know, apparently she was a free agent.
Exactly. Pretty much.
Well, okay. So, and then this is a 10-minute short. And the one thing I'm curious about that is when I look at that, it makes me wonder, is this kind of like you guys are developing a proof of concept for a potentially larger project later?
We are kind of doing something that's double-edged, where we want something the fans can really enjoy, but also we want something that we can show off the characters and show off sort of the mood of the comic, I guess, in animated form, and have something to basically walk around and say, hey, look at this. What do you think?
Yeah.
Because right now is a very exciting time to be producing media of pretty much any kind. It used to be very unusual for a person who was writing and drawing a creator-owned title, like a person who was not doing a superhero book, to option their story and get a film made. That used to be quite unusual. And nowadays, it's something where I have multiple friends that has happened to them. It's just a thing that happens. And it used to be very unusual for someone to be able to just have an animated show based on an idea they had. That was like on television, I mean, specifically, that was kind of the exclusive territory of, maybe, if I can be crass about it, like 3 or 4 white guys.
Right.
And now that is definitely not the case. And it's really exciting. And it kind of, I don't want to say gold rush, but it feels like now there are more opportunities for more diverse content by more diverse creators in a way that really didn't exist 5 to 10 years ago. And it's a very exciting time to be in media. And I say that Iron Circus, and when it comes to Kickstarter almost, it was weird because it felt like it came about at the exact right time for me, where I had a readership that knew I had these ideas, but no money. And I would talk constantly about, there's this book I want to do. It's called Poor Craft. It's kind of the book I wish I had when I was 18. I'd love to hire a friend to illustrate the script I wrote, but there's no money. So I'll figure it out. I'll see what happens. And then Kickstarter rolls up and it's like, oh, there's the money.
Yeah.
And
then you're like, I do what I want.
Exactly. And now we have Lackadaisy, and it just happened. And like, not to, Fable's put a ton of work into this, and the crew has already put a ton of work into this. But when I say it just happened, I mean that in the sense that, like, it kind of, Fable just walked up to me at Kala at the con I thought I was going to sock. And it was like, hey, can I talk to you about a thing? And it's like, whoa. And by the way, I ended up like selling out all my books. So no, Kala was in actuality
the best.
Yeah, it's the con where I just like walked out the door like a toddler who's being punished, like walks up the stairs to their room with like stomp, stomp, stomp. Like that was me walking out my front door to go to Kala. Like, I don't want to do this. No, it was great.
Then you floated back.
Exactly, and it's awesome. Like, if this works out, I'd love to do a lot more of these. I'd love to do a lot more animated shorts. I'd love to almost like kind of develop this library. And if people go for it, I'd love Iron Circus to get more involved in kind of that aspect of entertainment and like become a legit multimedia company, in the sense that this is sort of our bread and butter. Like, I love comics, but I also love cartoons, and I also love video games. Like, those are the 3 things that kind of take up the majority of my time, whether I'm working or I'm playing. And I'd love to have sort of a stake in all 3 one day.
I have to say, as far as like lead off projects for a new diversification of what you do, Lackadaisy, I mean, just like looking at like when you consider all the material that Tracy has produced over the years, and then you look at like the character sheets that you have on the Kickstarter, which like the aesthetic is just like, I love it. I couldn't love it more.
Isn't it adorable?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing because it's like there is like a real cuteness to it, but there's also like you could see there being an edge, and it's such like a perfect blend. And I don't know, it's like I was actually thinking about this earlier. There's some comics, when you think about how they could be adapted into other mediums, where it's like, this is like a quintessentially great all-time comic, but you're like, I don't know if I could really see this as like a movie or an animated series or something like that. But Lackadaisy is one of those ones where you look at it and you're like, this just makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. I'm pretty sure Tracy was at one point, before Lackadaisy just became her primary job, I'm pretty sure she was at some point involved in animation to some degree. But like the sensibility of it, like one of the things that I'm very much about quality. One of the things that I say a lot to folks asking, like, how do you decide what to publish, is I'm shallow. I look at looks first. And if the looks don't immediately grab me, well, then, why even continue? And Lackadaisy has always been one of those comics where you look at it and you're like, oh, what is this? And you have to keep going because you've never seen anything like that. And I think the designs have translated to animation really well. Obviously they have to be simplified a little bit, but I think that feel, the thing that makes me go, oh, what is this? It's still there.
Yeah. I also, and they also have the built-in audience, as you noted. That was one thing that I was really impressed by. You guys have the animated cameo tier on for rewards on the Kickstarter, and you've already sold 4 of those at $10,000, which really speaks to the passion people have for that.
Yeah.
And then one other thing I want to mention is, or ask about, because I always find this part fascinating. It's like you start with 85,000 and then you have stretch goals. But right now your big stretch goal is an extra post-credit scene starring Mordecai Heller, who is a fan favorite character, also an incredible look. What happens when you hit that goal? Like, do you develop a new one? Do you always have more to work with behind the scenes in case, you break glass in case of emergency amounts of success?
Honestly, I think stretch goals are a slippery slope, and I understand how hypocritical this sounds, but I think if someone is out there getting ready to run baby's first Kickstarter, just don't do stretch goals.
Sure.
When you hit the goal, make an update, thank everyone tearfully, say, you guys are the greatest, this is going to be awesome, can't wait to get to work. No stretch goals. Because I've seen stretch goals sink a project because the stretch goals were poorly considered.
Right.
This is the best way to put it. A great example to me of a poorly considered stretch goal is stuff that sort of engenders whole new production cycles. So if you are saying, help me print my comic, and your stretch goals are, if we get to this much, I'll make an enamel pin set. And if we get to this much, I'll print t-shirts. And if we get to this much, I'll make bookmarks or something. And each of those is now a lot more work that you have to do. Another manufacturer you need to find and get a quote from, more art that you need to produce, especially for this, and, more money. It's just a lot of things, a lot of tat that now you have to deal with. It's become this multi-step process that has complicated your life. And I think, especially when you're running your first Kickstarter, the last thing you need to do is complicate your life. The stretch goals that we have set up right now, a lot of them are things that are literally really easy to do, or we were going to do anyway. A great example is the online premiere. We're probably going to do something a lot like that anyway, whether we reach that stretch goal or not. Devlog access is one of those things where we're going to make the cartoon. We might as well write down, here's us making the cartoon. The only thing that I would kind of almost say is me being a raging hypocrite is shot glasses. But quite frankly, those were specifically requested by Tracy because it's a comic about a speakeasy and the people who read it request shot glasses a lot. So it's one of those, the fans demand kind of thing. And even our very first stretch goal, the Lackadaisy emoji pack, there is someone in Tracy's Discord who has already made something like that. And now we're just going to hire her to basically do it again, but more. So it's like a lot of that is already planned out. A lot of that is us. When we were deciding on stretch goals, we were all like, okay, so what would be practical? What do you want to do? And we would just go through them and argue the advantages and disadvantages of each. You'll notice there aren't any enamel pins, for example. That is a more involved process than I think a lot of people suspect, and I'm just not in the mood for it. And another one of them is another book, because you know what? I know how to make books.
Yeah.
That's easy. So, and I like stretch goals to keep excitement high, but at the same time, I would urge people to understand they are not necessary. They're not something that every Kickstarter should have. And if it is your first Kickstarter, I would actually recommend against them. Just focus on getting the book done and out to people, or whatever project you're doing done and out to people.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense because you don't want to increase the level of difficulty on yourself as you're trying to commit, finish this big project. Like let's say you have your comic project and you end up selling, I don't know, some obscene amount of books. Let's say like 5,000 people back you. And then you have to take care of all of that yourself unless you hire somebody to do all that for you. And then if you start compounding it by adding more and more layers of production to it, then that stretches that out. And then all of a sudden you're the person who delivered really slowly and people remember that. And
yeah,
the internet has a long memory, even though we move on from topic to topic very fast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that once you've just established that, even if your books are late, because frankly, almost like 80% of Kickstarters just deliver late. That's just a fact.
Sure.
But like, even if your books are late, if you deliver, if people get the books, and at the end of the day, it's like they're all like, oh, so-and-so is another Kickstarter. I remember the last book I got from them. I really liked it. I'll back this one too. So like that's what you want. You want the return customers. You want the people that understand and believe in you and know that you produce quality stuff. And that's something most people aren't going to get right away at the very beginning of their career. It's something that you build up. And like I say, I have at the end of this Kickstarter, I'll probably have 25,000 people now who get an email every time Iron Circus launches a Kickstarter instead of 22, because I'll have, 3,000 other people who have never backed anything by me before, but here they are now, and that's the idea, to slowly build up a customer base of people who believe in you and people who will buy your stuff.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people kind of don't understand that this is incremental. This is a thing that you earn.
Yeah. I'm going to bring up another phrase that I imagine you probably hate, and I also kind of hate it, but it's a real thing. Personal branding. I mean, like,
oh, God,
it's so gross. It's so gross. But at the same time, it's like that's what this is. It's like, it's shifting from the corporation to the creator. And it's turning it from, I believe in, Sony's ability to make good Spider-Man movies or whatever, to like, I believe in this person's ability to deliver the material that she says that she will in the time that they say that they will deliver it. And also of a quality that is certainly up to par, but also going beyond that. And like, it really is like, this sounds really like weird, but it's a belief system in some ways. It's like, you have to believe that there will be something at the end of this.
Yeah. A great example I can think of is, very topical. Jojo Rabbit. I have had friends who are all like, only Taika Waititi could get me to see a movie with Hitler in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, that's it. Because it's by Taika Waititi, I trust it won't be some horrible thing. It'll actually, he's doing this for a reason. And because I know who he is and what he does, I am interested to see what that reason is. Also
a creator who's successfully used Kickstarter before for what we do in the shadows. My wife backed it and she was like, I don't know, she like believed in that movie to, I don't know, perhaps an unhealthy degree, but then she was proven correct because that movie rules.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things a lot of people kind of don't remember. Yeah, What We Do in Shadows, that was a Kickstarter project. A lot of things are Kickstarter projects that lead to much bigger things. And maybe that'll be the case for Lackadaisy. Who knows?
I hope it is, because this is one of my random notes. I don't even have a question about this. I just appreciate that it's the only Kickstarter I've ever seen with a violinist credited. Which is awesome.
Yeah, Rocky Rickaby, he plays the violin, so we needed an actual violinist for the short.
That's incredible. Well, so one last question about this, and we talked about this beforehand a little bit, but you were launching. It's kind of like that line in Fight Club. It's like, you met me at a very interesting time in my life. And it's like, you launched your Kickstarter at a very interesting time in the world. And because of that, I imagine there was people that were trepidatious about the idea of you doing that, but you knew that it would work. You believed it would work. Were you nervous at all, though? Was there any concern at all that this wouldn't deliver because people were like, I don't know, like anytime there's uncertainty, that can throw things off. What were you feeling?
I think it's healthy to understand anything can fail. Any endeavor can fail. I mean, Cats, like you can
Cats
have
the movie.
Cats the movie.
I still really want to see it. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I honestly think someone sat there, they stacked the deck, they bought a bunch of super expensive effects, they hired some really, really big names, and then there's, Cats. I mean, how long has that been running on Broadway? Everyone knows what Cats is. And so they stacked the deck as much as possible. and they made a dumpster fire.
But the dumpster fire I want to see so badly.
I know, that's the thing. It's like, it's almost because of like the speed of culture now. Like it's almost, but not quite in that place that it took Rocky Horror like years to get to. Where you can absolutely imagine a little like, chocolate box theater in like the slightly rundown part of town every weekend for the next year, showing Cats at midnight and people showing up dressed as their own personal Jellicles Sona. You know what I mean?
Oh my God. I hope you invented the phrase Jellicles Sona, because I don't know if that's a thing.
I can almost guarantee I didn't, even though I don't know.
That's amazing.
But like, I can totally see that happening. But at the same time, like, failure is always a thing that can happen. No one is above having a failure. And I try to hold on to that. I try to absolutely sit there and just, like sit with the prospect that things I do might not work, because I think that's healthy.
It's very healthy.
But at the same time, it felt like a home run. Like I keep saying that, like it felt like obviously this is going to work. Like, and when I try to listen to that instinct I have where, when Fable came up to me at Colin and was like, hey, you want to do this thing with us? And I was like, oh my God, that would obviously work, was my initial reaction. Yeah. And I put a lot of stock in that initial reaction. Like when I see someone's work, like I last time I had it, was when Evan Dom approached me and he was like, hey, I want to do a comic about the harrowing of hell. And I had that feeling like, oh my God, obviously. It's like, yes, obviously, do it, obviously. And when I have that sort of that surge of, oh my God, this idea super excites me, I just kind of let it carry me, because while it's easy to go back and be all like, oh, I'm going to sit here and second guess myself. Oh, was that really as good an idea as I thought it was? Let me sit here and, sort of like worry myself into a nub about whether or not this is a good idea. It's like I have to hold on to that. No, well, my initial reaction is the one that I think is sort of the purest reaction. Yeah. So the purest reaction is like the one that I try to hold on to.
So actually, I want to bounce back to like Iron Circus, the Iron Circus Comics side of thing really quick, because I think that looking at your line is so fascinating, because you go on to the side your site and you can look at all the different comics you're selling, and there's 4 main genres, if you will, that you can search through, and it's erotica, sci-fi, fantasy, how-to. Those are 2 of those I would say have a decent amount of backing in term or production behind it in terms of sci-fi and fantasy. Like you can find books like that. Erotica, I mean, I don't want to besmirch the comic book form, but it is a bit of a repressed medium in a lot of ways, and like how-to is something that is like both it's like not really a served audience or a served genre, and then B, it's also something that like I don't feel like it's as much buy-in as you would normally think, and yet you've found success with these things. And I mentioned the Chancellor and the Citadel earlier, and that's a comic that I really love. Maria France is fantastic, also
beautiful,
an Alaskan, so big props. I support the Alaskans. When you're looking at these things and you're looking at Evan Dom's work, and you're looking at Maria France's work, and you're looking at all these different people, how do you decide what creators in comics and etc. are the ones that fit you? Is it a gut instinct thing? Is it more than that? What is it?
Honestly, it's gut instinct. The thing I'm really fond of saying is I am the only hurdle you have to clear over here. If I like your work, we're publishing you. That's the only thing you have to make sure happens. Yeah. At the end of the day, I do have assistant editors who bring me work and they go, hey, I was just, screwing around on Twitter and I found this person and I think they look good and I think they fit Iron Circus. Here's a link. And, there's a lot of that these days and I love that and I appreciate that. But at the end of the day, if I find a person and I really like their work, it's like, yep, that's it. That's all you have to worry about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it makes sense too, because I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of times it's like it goes back to the belief thing. It's like if you believe in the work, it makes it a lot easier for you to produce something great with it and also to sell it easier.
Yeah. It's like if I can sit behind a table, I do this increasingly less these days, but especially these days. But if I can sit behind a table at a con and if I can see someone's eyes kind of linger on your book. Yeah. And then I can immediately grab them and give them the elevator pitch and be like, oh, this one is about a vampire that falls in love with a 60-year-old mortal man and how they contend with the fact he's going to live forever, but he's totally not. It's like if I could just, get that out there. and I can't fake the enthusiasm. You know what I mean? It's like, if I love this book, if I'm like that, that helps me sell your work, and that's good.
I'll tell you one thing. I'm a huge production value nerd. For some reason, like, I get really hyped about, like, I think it's weirdly like the 90s comic fan in me, because I was growing up when there was like hologram covers and stuff like that. But when there's like really nice paper, and then there's like, I keep bringing up Chancellor and Citadel. Chancellor and Citadel has like some kind of holofoil, exactly. And like, there's something that sees holofoil on a cover, and I'm just like, yes, this is for me. And when you combine all those things, it's like, it's kind of what you said. Like, sometimes if you're at a con, or you're at a comic shop, or you're even at a bookstore, wherever, it's like, if there's something that can draw the eye, and then when you pick it up and there's like a substance to it, and there's a good feel to it, all of that is like that holistic production value ties to everything else and makes it easier to buy into something that maybe you wouldn't expect to buy to begin with.
Yeah. I think we actually have terminology over at Iron Circus. Forgive me, I know this is not very enlightened. We refer to like, this book needs to look a little sluttier. Like, is there anything we can do? Because it's like, we need to make the book super pretty. We need to make the book super appealing. It needs to have some kind of shelf appeal, I think, is the more acceptable way. But we're all like, oh no, this book needs to be way sluttier. Can we put some like gloss or some kind of soft touch matte effect on the cover? Is there anything we can do? So we talk about that because we know that's what draws the eye, and we know we're on a bookshelf next to a whole lot of other books that have varying degrees of sluttiness. And if we can be pretty in a way that another book might not have put in the effort to be pretty, that's points in our favor. Like, if we can have some die cut thing on the cover, or if we can have some gold foil on the title, if that makes a person linger for just that second longer, that'll be worth it.
Well, and it goes back to kind of what we were talking about in the beginning about Iron Circus Comics and why, you decided to do your own thing. When I look at like the last 20 years, back before you started, in your doing Iron Circus and everything like that, you look through the things that kind of are huge changes. And you look at 2006, you had like Scholastic Graphics, and for a second come then. And then, another one that I think is important is like Webtoon came to America in 2014. And like, that is a place where you can find romance comics and slice of life and et cetera, et cetera. And so like, when you look at these, and then you look at Iron Circus, you look at those three kind of moments, and I think the thing that unites them, besides the fact that they're all comics, is that they differentiate themselves in a way that serves audiences that were perhaps underserved before, in a way that they want to be served.
Oh, yeah. I think that one of the things people kind of need to keep understanding is large companies, mega corporations, entertainment monoliths are, God, how do I say this in a nice way? They are primarily staffed by not particularly creative people who are cowards. And like, I think the best like boiled down sort of expression of that is Michael Eisner. I know he's not at Disney anymore, but when he was, he at some point said something to the effect of, it's not our job to make art. It's our job to make money. And that is the approach a lot of people in entertainment who are not creatives have. They are very risk averse, which is why, for example, we are seeing The Lion King again, and why we are on how many Spider-Man movies where we're talking about his origin, and how many Batman movies where we're talking about his origin. And they're risk averse. They want something that has already been proven to work before and it's why, for some reason there was like that craze a while ago where let's do Scooby-Doo again. Let's do the Brady Bunch again. Let's do this other TV show again. Because name recognition matters more than anything, because the more name recognition it has, the less work they have to do, and the less of a risk it is. And no large company wants to put literal millions on the line, tens of millions, if not 100 million on the line for a thing they found on the internet or a random thing they brought you. That is something that is exceptionally rare for mega corporation conglomerate type. I'm talking about your Disneys, your Warner Brothers.
Sure.
It's a completely different game when, Netflix is out there making what is it? Warrior Nun, Ariella, and the end of the fucking world. Like those two things are the exact opposite of blockbuster comics, but here they are optioned in on Netflix. But I think that risk aversion that's in the majority of really, really big deal, because they have the most enormous market share on earth. That's in the risk aversion. That's a huge part of the way a lot of these monoliths operate. They basically boil down to, we don't want anything new. We don't want anything untried. We don't want anything that hasn't already made $1 million somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so they shut out a lot of things that weren't incubated and born in an era that had significantly less diversity of thought and of creator on the creative side, which is why we're subjected to like 50, 60-year-old characters kind of over and over and over again, because it's characters that are owned by a corporation that everybody already knows, and let's just keep making movies about them forever. And I mean, if you like those movies, this is not a value judgment. This is not me saying you're a bad person for liking those movies. The same way I don't think you're a bad person for liking McNuggets. I like McNuggets.
Delicious.
A lot of people put a lot of work into McNuggets to make sure I would like McNuggets, and as a result, I like McNuggets. But at the same time, like, they're not going to put a ton of work into finding out if I like moose, because that's a lot riskier. And it's the same thing where, Disney isn't going to roll out to, a web cartoonist and be all like, oh, well, this is a fascinating story about a werewolf girlfriend. Let's give this a go. Mm-hmm. Like, no, that hasn't been proven. They have stockholders to appease, It
is interesting because it's like, there's like value, like the tricky thing is like there's value in the safety, but it also leads to kind of homogenous looks and feels.
Oh yeah.
But then on the flip side, it's like, I don't know. I mean, even when you look at something like DC Comics, so you look at like DC Comics and you talk about, them just kind of churning out stuff that kind of fits, their general vibe, and that's what they go with. But then you look at the history of DC Comics, and the comics that people really remember are the ones that did something different. And yet, like, I feel like that's often forgotten. And it's really fascinating. There's, like, a lot of times those are the stories that end up getting adapted and end up doing really well. And so it's interesting that there's a lot of like internal signs that show that homogeny is not the right way. And yet it is still the way to do it, because, as you said, like, it really comes down to risk aversity. It's like, what is less likely to fail more than what is more likely to thrive?
Yeah, because, and I'm not sitting here going like, oh, there are no creatives at the upper echelons of Hollywood. Like, obviously, there's like Guillermo del Toro and people like that. But I do think a lot of people who are involved in the entertainment industry aren't necessarily creative people. A lot of them, they watch the bank account and they have focus groups and they look at trends in media, and that's how they make their decisions. And they are not prone to the freedom, if they even have that feeling, to follow that feeling that I talked about earlier, where somebody says something to me like, oh, here's an idea for a book I had. And I just go, oh my God, yes. Yeah. It's like that's not a thing I think comes up a lot in those circles, because, oh my God, yes, is it worth gambling $100 million on?
Yeah. I don't know why, but ever since you said cats, I keep wanting to say you feel it in your jellicles, even though that's not right at all.
I feel it in my chest. That's like something that would be on. Oh, do you know the animator Worthy Kids? Oh God, there's this animator named Worthy Kids, and he does the most amazing animations. I feel it in my jellicles.
Oh my God.
Something that would be just yeah. Everyone go look up Worthy Kids. WORTHIKIDS. Worthy Kids.
All right, I will check him out. But so the last thing I want to bring up is, we've talked about this a little bit, and I apologize for putting you on the spot, but I feel like, so we're in this very uncertain time, and we're in this very strange period in comic history, in world history, in societal history. And a lot of creators are going to have a hard time with this because there's no cons. There's like a lot of the stuff that you're relying on isn't there. A lot of the stuff that you're leaning into typically to not just like survive, but hopefully thrive, are gone. So you're somebody who has to think about probably contingencies and has to think about how you're going to approach these, and you have to be flexible, and you think about Kickstarter and conventions and all this stuff like that. If you what advice would you have for somebody who's having to go through this and is missing out on some of those key things that they would normally rely on? Like, how would you start thinking about things, knowing that the world will not be the same way it was for probably the next couple months, at least?
Honestly, I think this should open with the caveat that I am functioning at a different level than the majority of people in comics right now.
Absolutely.
And I am extremely aware of that. So take everything I say here on out with a grain of salt, everyone, because I have not been at sort of the independent creator level for at least a decade plus. But if I were the type of person who does like 15 cons a year and always has a table in Artist Alley and sells prints and charms and commissions and stuff to get by, and I was contending with the cancellation of basically my rent check every month now, I think it's kind of a do or die moment. I think there are two things that I think are super important for you to remember right now. It's super important to always keep a diverse income stream. You need to be constantly thinking on your feet. You're a small business person, and small business people need to be flexible in their thinking. You need to try and find new ways to make money that you maybe have never tried before. If you've never had a Patreon, maybe now might be the time to open a Patreon. If you've never done private commissions, maybe now's the time to open private commissions. If you've never had anything on Gumroad, maybe try that. If you've never run a Kickstarter, maybe now's the time to run a Kickstarter. I think a lot of flexibility and approach is going to be the saving grace of a lot of people, because I think it's easy to get comfortable making money one way. And when that way is taken away from you, to freeze up and not know what to do. A lot of what Iron Circus is doing right now is me sort of doing the publisher version of that, the whole offering all of my 2020 books for pre-order right now in the Iron Circus shop. That's part of it. Us trying to figure out what to do. Pajama Con, that's another part of it. Just us sort of trying stuff out and seeing how it goes. And you need to sort of shrink that down to an independent operator kind of level and just explore all of your options. And the second thing, which I think is super, super vital, there is no shame in a day job. If it comes to that, if you are struggling to get your share of the rent and someone goes, well, you can come and work at my office and do filing or something, or, someone offers you just a position somewhere that feels like seasonal work or, desk job work or even janitorial work, whatever will actually get you a rent check and is safe and you're physically capable of it, there's no shame in taking that job. I think there's a weird, poisonous, pretty shitty kind of thought pattern that goes through a lot of creative communities that having a day job means you have failed in some way or you're not truly dedicated to your art. That's not true. Mm-hmm. You do what you have to do, and it doesn't have to be forever. You control your own destiny. And if this stuff blows over by June, let's say, you can quit in June and you can go back to doing comics and stuff. And in a couple years, you can talk about, oh yeah, that coronavirus thing. Oh man, I had to spend 3 months as a janitor at a middle school because that's how rough it got. And it will just be a moment in your life. It's okay. It doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean you lost. It just means you did what you had to do to get by. Yeah. And don't let anybody make you feel bad about it.
That is perfect advice. And I do want to say, underrated part about day jobs is I've talked to many comic creators who said that they had weird day jobs temporarily, and they ended up being excellent inspiration for your comics. So consider research.
Yeah, exactly. Why not?
Yeah. But no,
pretty sure I have a friend who's got a best-selling graphic novel about the time he spent as a garbage man.
Wait, what is that?
Oh, that's by Durf Back Durf.
Oh yeah. Oh wait. I think I have that and have not read it. That is,
it's called Trash.
I do have that. Yes. I have you would not believe my nightstand. It is an absolute war zone of comics and books to read and everything like that. So that will be prioritized now. But Spike, thank you so much. That's all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about Lackadaisy, to talk about comics, to talk about Iron Circus. I appreciate you taking the time.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Off Panel with Iron Circus Comics C Spike Trotman. You can find Spike on Twitter at Iron_Spike, on Iron Circus Comics website at IronCircus.com, and Lackadaisy, the animated short film on Kickstarter. As a heads up, Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out the new version of the site and consider subscribing for access to all the site's content and its members only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show in there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow on Twitter at @SketchComic, or following me at @SlicedFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Charlie Chu, Greg Peterson, Stephen Hall, Dan Lee, Cameron Schrader, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Merrick, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachalo, Torin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Harry Sayer, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mazel, Danny Ollie, Paul Slates, Litwin Studios, Akil Wilson, Nathan House, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Troy Jeffrey Allen, Leona Kingus, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Ryanwan, Connor Farner, Vita Yala, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil, Kokachi, Phil White, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, Dave Brody, Ira James Udaskin, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert Niccolo, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in tomorrow for another episode.